What's up guys, it's Tony from Streetball Strategies, where we use strategy to build your streetball legacy. Today we're talking about saving time by not making unnecessary mistakes. So a couple of videos ago we were talking about how to avoid creating bad habits because of all the time that goes into being wasted while having those bad habits. So you spend time developing the bad habits, you spend time using the bad habits, and then you have to spend time realizing that you have bad habits. You have to spend time analyzing what they are. You have to spend time figuring out how to fix it, and then you have to spend time actually going about changing those bad habits into good habits, and that takes a ton of time. And when you're learning a new skill, making mistakes just comes along with the process. It's just part of the process of learning a new skill. When you're trying to do something new that you don't know how to do, mistakes just happen because you don't know what you're doing. But the mistakes I'm talking about are mistakes that you're not aware that you're making, but if you were aware that you're making them, you have the skill enough to stop making them and then correct them immediately so that you're not wasting time making unnecessary mistakes. So let's use the example of a jump shot. So when we talk about specific skills when it comes to basketball, I like to think of it as we have macro skills and then we have micro skills involved in those macro skills. So with a jump shot, that would be considered a macro skill because within that macro skill of a jump shot comes a bunch of micro skills involved with performing that one major skill. So let's say you decide that you're going to work on the macro skill of a jump shot, and then you decide that inside of that skill you want to work on your release point for that jump shot. So you're going to be working on the micro skill of your release point. So now you have to take the time to decide what skill you're going to work on. Then you're going to take time to decide what about that skill that you're going to be working on, what weaknesses you have, what mistakes you may be making. You're going to analyze what you need to work on. You're going to decide how you're going to work on it, and then you're going to spend time actually practicing and drilling and working on that skill. So even that in itself has a good chunk of time involved with how you're going to work on that skill. But then let's say as you're working on that micro skill of your release point for your jumper, as you're doing that, you start to make the mistake unbeknownst to you that you're starting to mess up the way you're loading your jump for your jumper. So you're working on your release point, that's where your focus is, and because you're so focused on that one micro skill, another micro skill involved with the jumper, in this example, the way you're loading your jump, you start making a mistake with that micro skill. And now you're going through the macro skill of shooting that jumper. You feel that your release point feels good. It's doing what you want it to do, it's where you want it to be, but something else, some other micro skill is throwing off your jumper. And so now you have to take the time to analyze your jumper again and figure out what you're doing wrong, what mistake you're making, and then once you realize, oh, it's my jump, the way I'm loading my jump, now you have to take time to analyze how you're loading your jump, figure out what's wrong with it, figure out how you're going to make it better, and then take time to then work on that micro skill, thus spending even more time fixing a mistake that you made while you were improving a different micro skill. And then say as you're working on the way you load your jump, you start to accidentally, unbeknownst to you, mess up the way you're placing your elbow when it comes to your jumper. And now you're in a loop, a cycle of working on one skill, elevating one micro skill, and then mistakenly and unbeknownst to you, as you're improving one micro skill, you are mistakenly degrading another micro skill while you're focusing on the first one. And I realize those are kind of extreme examples, but it's very possible to have something like that happen where you are so focused on one thing that something else starts to slip while you're focusing on the first thing, and then you have to go back and put in time to analyze and be aware, and then figure out how you're going to fix it, and then put in the time to fix it. That's a lot of time that's being used there. Whereas in order to fix making that kind of a mistake, you could be aware of making that second mistake, and then if you're aware of it, because you have the skill to fix it, you can immediately stop making that mistake and only focus on the one skill that you're trying to improve, thus saving yourself time because you're not making a second mistake while trying to work on the first skill. And if you're like me, I'm a monotasker, meaning I can focus on one skill at a time and concentrate and focus on it really well, but it's multitasking that I have a problem with. And so the one skill that I'd be working on, I can improve that pretty well, pretty efficiently, but I may let other skills slide accidentally in the process. And my advice as to how to deal with that would be to be aware. Now, how do we be aware in cases like that? Well, when you're working on a macro skill such as a jumper, or it could be any macro skill, but in this case a jump shot, when you're working on a micro skill such as your release point, what you want to try to do is have everything else in that jump shot be exactly the same every time you do it. So everything else in your jump shot is going to be exactly the same every single time you take that shot, the only variable being your release point. That way you can focus on your release point, and because you're doing the same movement, the same jump shot exactly the same way every time, when you do accidentally make a mistake, you'll be able to feel it and become aware of it when it happens, because it will feel different, it will feel off, because the only variable is supposed to be your release point. Anything else that happens differently by accident, you will be able to be aware of and take notice of, because you've programmed yourself that everything else in your jump shot is exactly the same every time. So that if you are working on your release point and at some point you do start to load up your jump weirdly for some unknown mistaken reason, you'll be able to feel it, thus be aware of it, and then as soon as you're aware of it, you can then make a mental note to yourself to stop making that mistake and only focus on your release point by making sure that every time you take that jumper, everything is the same except for your release point. When you're working on a micro skill within that bigger macro skill, try to do the same movement, the same pattern, as best you can, exactly the same every time you do it, and then focus on that one micro skill, that one micro movement inside of it, so that you can isolate that one micro skill by itself, so that you're working on that one skill, and then anything else, any kind of deviation that's happening inside of that macro skill that you're working on, you'll be able to feel it, be aware of it, and then correct it immediately. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's kind of something that you were already doing kind of naturally anyway, with the spirit of trying to save yourself time. But I hope that this video helps you to sort of be more aware of the fact that things like that can happen, and they can happen time after time when you're talking about things that are so small, such as micro skills, when it comes to like working on your release and then something else inside of your jump shots getting messed up on you while you're concentrating on that one thing, something else gets neglected, you start making mistakes in another aspect of that macro skill. And I hope that if you become more aware of making mistakes in a pattern like that, you can now stop yourself from doing that by having awareness and being able to control how you do things, and thus saving yourself time in the process. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope you're using your time wisely by trying to avoid as many unneeded mistakes as possible. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell to be notified of all of my future videos. So thank you guys again, and I will see you next week.
Getting rolled to the day I see my casket buried as a G while the whole world remembers me.
Oh, by the way, now that the weather is getting a little bit nicer out, I'm hoping to maybe start playing around with posting multiple videos a week. Probably more like 2 videos a week. It would be like on a, I don't know, Tuesday and Friday schedule, I think I'd be looking at. So just stay tuned for that. I'm hoping to be able to start doing that soon, and if that does happen, I will let you guys know.
Buried as a G while the whole world remembers me until the end of time.